In the 1830s, with America's fields bursting and its population doubling, a single farmhand with a scythe could not reap more than an acre a day, leaving millions of bushels at the mercy of storms and rot. Every expert called mechanical harvesters dangerous junk, warning of shattered crops and maimed farmers. Then, in a single demonstration, a machine cut 12 acres in one day, 8 times faster than any man. How did a dismissed invention overturn everything experts believed, and what did it cost to prove them wrong? The stakes were nothing less than the future of American agriculture. By 1820, the United States counted just over 9.5 million people. 2 decades later, that number soared past 17 million. Fields stretched farther each year to feed the swelling cities and growing families. But for all that land, the harvest was still chained to the speed of a man swinging a scythe, dependent on human muscle and daylight. 1, maybe 1.5 acres in a day if the weather held, and the hands did not tire. Every summer, the clock started ticking the moment the grain ripened. A single thunderstorm could flatten a season's work. Too much sun, and the wheat shattered to the ground before anyone could cut it. Too little labor, and the crop rotted where it stood. There were no second chances. With each census, the gap between mouths to feed and the acres that could be harvested grew wider. In some regions, farmers hired every spare hand for the harvest. Young boys, old men, even travelers passing through, yet still ran out of time. Diaries from the 1830s tell of families watching clouds gather, praying workers could finish before rain ruined everything. In the South, enslaved men and women worked dawn to dusk, sometimes just to keep pace with the fields. The gap was real, and it was urgent. The arithmetic was relentless. 10 men working with scythes could clear 10 acres a day. But if a farm covered 100 acres, the harvest stretched on for weeks, with every day bringing new risks from weather or disease. There were stories of entire communities losing their grain to a single storm, the year's food and income washed away in an afternoon. As the country pushed west and new land opened, the harvest bottleneck threatened to choke expansion. Railroads and canals promised to move grain to market, but only if it could be reaped in time. Every new town, every mile of prairie under plow, added pressure to find a faster way. The future of American farming, and the families who depended on it, hung on the hope that someone could break the limits of muscle and daylight. Headlines in the 1830s didn't mince words. Agricultural editors called early harvesting machines dangerous contraptions and field wreckers. One British paper sneered that the American reaper looked like a cross between an Astley chariot, a wheelbarrow, and a flying machine. In the United States, the warnings piled up. McCormick's magazine ran editorials predicting broken arms and ruined crops. Farmers, reading these accounts, kept their distance. Some refused to let their horses near the machines, convinced the racket would send animals bolting through fences. Others said they had seen a prototype tip sideways, scattering gears and cogs across the field, nearly trampling a boy who had wandered too close. Eyewitnesses remembered the early demonstrations less as marvels and more as hazards. One neighbor in Virginia told his local paper he would not stand within 50 yards of a reaper, not with all that iron flailing about. Rumors spread of blades snapping loose, of men leaping from the driver's seat to save themselves, of horses panicking at the clatter and dragging wreckage through the wheat. For many, these were not cautionary tales. They were proof. If the machine did not maim the operator, it would surely destroy the crop. In the words of one skeptical farmer, "I would sooner trust a thunderstorm than that thing in my oats." Inventors who tried before McCormick rarely made it past the first season. Prototypes jammed, toppled, or simply broke down under the weight of expectation. Each failure hardened the public's opinion. Agricultural societies issued statements warning against unproven mechanical harvesters, and some even banned them from local fairs. Farm journals ran cartoons of runaway reapers, horses tangled in harness, and would-be inventors chased off by angry neighbors. The message was clear: muscle and daylight were reliable, machines were not. By the late 1830s, the phrase "dangerous junk" had become shorthand for any new harvester. The harvest crisis might have demanded a breakthrough, but the cultural wall around American fields was nearly as high as the wheat itself. Anyone hoping to change the rhythm of the harvest would need more than a clever design. They would have to survive the ridicule first. In the summer of 1831, inside a Virginia blacksmith shop, Cyrus McCormick set out to solve a problem that had defeated inventors for decades. He was 22 years old, with no formal training in engineering. But he had grown up watching his father's failed attempts at a mechanical harvester. Working alongside Joe Anderson, an enslaved blacksmith with a sharp mind for mechanics, McCormick began shaping iron and wood into something new. What set this machine apart was not just ambition. It was the way its parts worked together. At its heart lay a reciprocating blade, a bar of sharpened steel that slid back and forth in a rapid, saw-like motion. Unlike the swinging arc of a scythe, the blade's straight, vibrating action sheared through stalks cleanly with each pass. Fixed iron fingers, spaced along the cutting edge, kept the grain upright and separated. These divider fingers acted like a comb, holding stalks steady so the blade could cut without clogging or dragging. Above the blade, a rotating reel spun steadily, its wooden arms sweeping the wheat toward the cutter. As the horses pulled the reaper forward, the reel guided the standing grain into the path of the blade, then swept the cut stalks onto a platform behind the machine. The entire contraption balanced on two wheels, with the horses hitched to the front and slightly to one side. This offset hitch allowed the machine to follow the curve of a field and adjust to uneven terrain, a detail missing from earlier designs that had toppled or jammed at the first rut. The frame, made from cast iron and seasoned oak, was sturdy enough to survive the shocks and jolts of real farm work. There was no instruction manual, no factory blueprint, just sketches, trial and error, and the steady hands of two men who believed the harvest could be changed. On paper, McCormick's reaper promised to cut labor in half for every acre harvested. In practice, it offered something even more important: a machine that could keep moving when human strength ran out. Word spread quickly among neighbors, some curious, others wary. The design was ready, but acceptance would prove much harder to win. When the reaper rolled out of the blacksmith shop, it did not go straight to the fields. Local authorities and farmers gathered for a closer look, circling the machine with folded arms and wary eyes. The verdict came quickly and without ceremony. A local newspaper ran a headline calling it "Too complicated for honest work." Editors warned that no farmer in his right mind would risk horses or a harvest on such a tangle of gears and blades. Letters to the editor echoed the same doubts. How could anyone fix this machine if it broke down in the middle of a field, miles from a smithy? What happened when a blade jammed or a wheel cracked on a hidden stone? Farmers pointed to the iron fingers and the crank-driven blade, muttering about the danger to man and beast. Some claimed the whirring reel would spook even the calmest horses. Others imagined the cutting bar snapping loose and slicing through anything in its path. The machine's very design, with a reciprocating blade, divider fingers, and a spinning reel, became proof not of innovation, but of risk. Instead of lining up to try it, most kept their distance, convinced the contraption would do more harm than good. A technical breakdown shows how it was meant to work. The blade slides back and forth, shearing stalks against the iron fingers. The reel sweeps the grain into the cutter's path and then pushes it onto a waiting platform. On paper, each part fits together. In the minds of the local authorities, it was a recipe for disaster. They stored the machine away, out of sight and out of mind. For years, the reaper sat idle, gathering dust and skepticism. The label stuck: dangerous junk, not fit for real farming. The harvest crisis dragged on, but the machine that might have changed everything was left to wait for proof no one believed would come. A historian of agricultural technology weighs in. At the time, most rural communities trusted what they could repair with a hammer and a nail. Anything more complex was seen as a liability, not an asset. The reaper's greatest strength, its engineering, was exactly what made it suspect. Frustration grew for those who had built it. The promise of a new harvest rhythm faded into silence, while the fields outside still depended on the swing of a scythe and the mercy of the weather. The morning of the trial drew a crowd: neighbors, skeptics, and farmhands who had spent lifetimes swinging scythes. The rules were simple. McCormick's machine would take one side of the field, a crew of seasoned reapers the other. Each man in the scythe team sharpened his blade, checked his grip, and eyed the machine with a mix of suspicion and defiance. McCormick hitched his horses, climbed onto the driver's seat, and gave the signal. The reaper lurched forward, its iron blade humming, divider fingers separating the stalks, reel sweeping grain into the cutter's path. It moved at a steady, relentless pace. On the other side, the scythe crew started strong, their blades flashing in the sunlight. But within an hour, one man paused to hone his edge. Another stopped to wipe sweat from his brow. The rhythm of hand labor, cut, gather, rest, could not match the machine's continuous motion. Eyewitnesses recalled the reaper's clatter echoing across the field, horses uneasy at first, but soon falling into step. The machine did not tire, did not slow. Each circuit of the field added to the tally. By midday, the gap was obvious. The team with scythes had cleared less than 2 acres, while the machine was halfway through its 6th. By late afternoon, the reaper's platform overflowed with cut grain, and the tally sheet showed the math in plain numbers. 12 acres were harvested in a single day, a feat no crew, no matter how skilled, could touch. One witness later wrote that they could not believe their eyes, and that the field was down before they finished their lunch. For years, critics had warned of disaster, broken limbs, ruined crops, chaos in the field. But the evidence now lay in the stubble. 12 acres, standing grain reduced to neat rows in a day's work. No theory, no editorial, could argue with what everyone saw. The consensus that had called the reaper dangerous junk began to crack, the arithmetic impossible to deny. A single reaper in the hands of one operator and a team of horses could cut 10 to 12 acres of wheat in a day, work that once took 5 or 6 experienced farmhands. The numbers spread quickly through farming communities and trade journals. Where wages for a harvest crew might run $1 per man per day, the cost of a reaper, about $125, became easier to justify with every season. Farmers started running the math themselves. A machine paid for itself after just 1 or 2 harvests, especially as labor shortages drove wages higher in the Midwest. Demand for the reaper soared. In the early 1840s, McCormick and his family built machines by hand, producing only a handful each year. But as word of the reaper's performance traveled west, orders outpaced what a small workshop could deliver. In 1847, McCormick moved production to Chicago, a decision shaped as much by geography as by ambition. The city stood at the edge of the Midwest grain belt, with rivers, railroads, and new settlers pouring into Illinois, Ohio, and Wisconsin. The factory in Chicago marked a new era. Output jumped from dozens of machines each year to hundreds, and soon thousands. By the end of the decade, the ledgers told the story. In 1848 alone, the factory shipped out 800 reapers, and by the 1850s, production climbed even higher. The economics of farming began to change. With a single purchase, a farmer could clear fields faster, plant more acres, and cut costs per bushel. The reaper did not just save time. It let families expand their farms and freed up workers for other jobs. The arithmetic of the harvest was rewritten, and the old bottleneck of muscle and daylight finally broke. Farmers who once watched the reaper with suspicion began to see its effects ripple through their communities. Diaries from the 1850s describe not just bigger harvests, but quieter fields, with fewer men slumped in exhaustion at the end of the day, and fewer hands bandaged from scythe cuts. Harvest season no longer meant weeks of back-breaking labor under the threat of storms. Instead, families finished their work days earlier, sometimes in half the time it used to take. The old dangers, blades slipping, arms strained past their limit, crops lost to weather, gave way to a new routine built around the steady pace of horses and iron. Letters from the Midwest tell of neighbors gathering not to sharpen blades, but to watch the machine work. Some wrote of the relief in seeing sons and fathers come home without the aches and injuries that once seemed unavoidable. The reaper did not just save labor. It changed what it meant to be a farming family. Children who might have been pressed into the fields could stay in school longer. Women freed from the pressure of feeding exhausted crews found more time for other work. Beyond the farm gate, the impact stretched even further. With more grain harvested, surpluses grew. Shipments of wheat and oats moved east by rail and canal, filling the granaries of New York, Boston, and Philadelphia. For the first time, American grain began to appear in European markets in significant quantities. By the 1850s, United States wheat exports had more than doubled, and Chicago's grain elevators became symbols of a new era. The reaper's influence could be measured not just in bushels, but in the steady flow of ships leaving American ports, carrying the harvest of fields that once would have stood half-cut. The machine that had been called dangerous junk became the backbone of American agriculture. In less than a generation, what began as a source of fear and mockery was woven into the fabric of rural life. The lessons from the reaper echoed far beyond the wheat fields. Skepticism can slow a revolution, but it cannot stop the arithmetic of progress. Every new tool faces doubt until its impact is measured in real numbers. Today, agriculture feeds nearly 8 billion people because machines still outpace skepticism. As climate pressures and population growth strain food systems, the lesson holds. Progress is rarely comfortable, but it is always necessary. Innovation does not wait for permission. What is dismissed as impossible now may feed the world tomorrow. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts below.